Kellcey by Kellcey tells the story of a bright, happy teenager living in Victoria, British Columbia, with her parents and sister, Cindy. Their idyllic family life is shattered by the untimely death of Cindy, and Kellcey becomes increasingly lonely as her grief-stricken parents constantly bicker, blaming each other for the untimely death of their daughter. Casey, alias Kellcey, is a beautiful teenage girl, is unable to find the love and attention she needs at home and finds it in Ben, a fellow student at her high school. Head over heels in love with Ben, she commits herself totally to him, despite her reservations about the company he keeps. A horrific sexual assault at a party where Ben fails her badly is to leave Kellcey traumatized and unable to continue to live in her beloved Canada. She tries to rebuild her shattered life in far-off London with a new friend and an online alter ego, Kellcey. Kellcey's compelling and at times disturbing book takes us on the teenager's life journey. Courageously, she deals with the dramatic issue of violence against girls and women, and its consequences. Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Heir's Lair. I'm your host, Jonathan Taylor. As you might have been able to guess from various context clues surrounding this video and what I've said so far, today's video will be a review of Kellcey by Kellcey. It is the first biography I've reviewed on this channel, and an autobiography at that, so either way it's a pretty important milestone in this channel's history. If I were to give a TLDW for this review, it would be something like this. Read this book. If you're a feminist or not, read this book. If you're a man or a woman, read this book. If you're agender or a xenogender, read this book. If you have a pulse and can read this book. I seriously cannot overemphasize how important and how meaningful this book actually is when it comes to, dealing with not just stuff surrounding sexual assault, but gender dynamics in general. In spite of that, I still have to mention some content warnings, namely for sexual assault, alcohol abuse, and psychological manipulation, maybe even self-manipulation. That being said, what can I say about the quality of this book? Well, I'll start with the things I didn't appreciate, which are thankfully quite few and far between. Number one, this book has a few more grammar and orthography errors than I really would have expected from a traditionally published title. Not enough to make it unreadable, but enough to make it noticeable. Also, another thing, a lot of Kellcey's interest in fashion is presented by her just naming the stores she visits, rather than her describing what kind of dresses she finds, what kinds of accessories she finds, and how she thinks about mixing and matching them. I think that would have given her a little bit more dimension. And finally, the way her family is described is somewhat inconsistent, and not just in a stream of consciousness, this is what I thought of them at the time kind of way. It takes her past the halfway point of the book to establish that her mom actually is actually full-time employed as well, and we only find out in the last third or last quarter of the book that Kellcey actually has cousins to whom she was close. Sorry about that. But yeah, those are really the only negatives I could mention. What then are the positives of this book? The one that immediately jumps out is the fact that this book has the best stream of consciousness narration style I have ever encountered in any book. As I mentioned in another book a few weeks ago that I described as one of my favorites of all time, Kellcey talks about one younger person, namely her younger self, with a lot of empathy and a lot of awareness to her condition. and that makes the narration itself uniquely excellent in displaying in displaying her rich and vivid inner world, and in making the reader strongly connect with her to the point where everything that happens to her has a major impact. As such, every twist of fate that gets thrown at Kellcey and the people around her, for good and for ill, immediately impacts the reader as well. This book has a main narration which describes Kellcey's life up until and after the sexual assault. And it is also, this main narrative is interspersed with various asides that the older or more mature Kellcey interjects in order to comment upon the situations her younger self is experiencing. This writing style has the potential to become very annoying very quickly, but fortunately Kellcey is so talented, so skilled, and so uniquely elegant in in bringing her commentary to the in bringing her comments to the text, that even when these asides interrupt otherwise very tense scenes, they always add just the right emphasis to the mood or to the point of whatever scene she is interrupting. It is frankly incredible to to behold. A lot of these asides mainly focus on gender dynamics, the things that cause them, and the things that that are supposed to counter them, and in many cases often exacerbate them. The young Kellcey sees them as a source of annoyance, but the older Kellcey is able to recognize that while there might at some point in the past have been a reason why these particular conventions have developed, their practical ramifications end up not just not solving the problems they were meant to address, but creating supplemental problems as well, especially in a more modern setting. And indeed, even as a male reader, or perhaps especially as a male reader who has had some level of bullying and maybe even neglect come upon him. Not all of it from his parents, but also from the surrounding society around me. I can say it was very frustrating to read just how her parents or her grandparents belittled her or talked down to her, because this and how they in general saw her protecting her not as a duty to empower, but as a duty to enclose. And yeah, I have to say that was very frustrating, especially when you realize that this only leads to, not only doesn't really protect her in the long run, but it also leads to her losing self-confidence first of all, and second of all losing confidence in the authority figures around her, i.e. in the people she is supposed to rely upon when or if things like the sexual assault that happened to her end up happening to her. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the way girls are educated currently, or were educated a decade or two ago, will always lead to them being sexually assaulted. But it does lead to a breakdown in the social relations they attempt to establish, and upon which they rely to keep themselves safe. And as such, it leaves them more susceptible to bad influences like the kind that that this book describes. And indeed, that is really the most regretful and perhaps sorrowful part um, of this story. The realization that what happened to Kellcey was less a question of if and more a question of when. What is somewhat more interesting, but also to some extent even sadder, and perhaps completely unintended, was looking through the text and looking into all the context clues, which show that Kellcey herself internalizes those opinions that are projected upon her by her authority figures, and how she ends up thinking of herself as being naive and fragile. She often compares herself to 19th century romantic female leads, or she talks about how proud she is to be under the control or influence of her boyfriend. That might be cute in the long run, but when you in the short run, but when you look at it in the long run, it becomes anything but. That being said, while it is at times unpleasant, and in one particular sequence outright disturbing, Kellcey's candidness remains the greatest strength of the story and of herself. Not just in how she presents the account of her life, but also in how she establishes her and how she takes charge of her life whenever she does actually do that, and how she builds and maintains the support structures around her, and also in how she describes everything that's going on through her and within her mind and within her awareness of herself after the assault occurred to her, and how she wrestles with the trauma she's received, and how she and how she goes on to build stronger and more reliable support structures later on. If I was her editor, I probably would have asked her to insist a little bit more on that particular part of the narrative. But if she wouldn't have wanted to, I can perfectly agree with that. I can empathize with that perfectly well, because the story, even as it stands right now, is still a great testament of all of her account and of all of the things she's been through, and I think it ultimately delivers an excellent message for survivors of such deeds, of sexual assault. Because even though it touches upon a very dark topic, the ultimate message is still one of one of hope, one of perseverance, and of endurance. Overall, in spite of some missteps, I have to say Kellcey stands out as a powerful manifesto for our time. A great and insightful description of the ills that have appeared within society, and a useful guide towards how to prevent or correct those ills once they show up. Part of me doesn't really want to give this book a rating, because on some level I think that giving it a rating and treating it like any other book would somehow cheapen its message. But on the other hand, putting it on the pedestal might not necessarily be the best thing this book needs. It really needs to, because it really doesn't need to be set aside. It really needs to be universalized, as well as the messages and the awareness that it brings to the literary world and in general to this world need to become more need to become popularized. As such, and also even if I were to rate it, I'm not going to rate what happened to it. I'm going to rate it how it is presented. And as such, I have no problem of rating. My final rating for Kellcey is unquestionably a 5 out of 5. And that was my review. Thank you for your attention. If you enjoyed this review, then please leave a like and maybe even share it wherever you think other people will like it as well. If you have anything you'd like to comment on what it is I said, the comment section awaits your input. And if you want to see when my next video gets released, well then please subscribe. Ideally also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will ask of you in order to keep you notified. My own debut book, Heir to the Empire: The Next Generation, is available at most major book retailers under a master link in the description below, right past my social media, which I also suggest you check out, should you wish to do so. Until next time, I am Jonathan Taylor, and this has been the Heir's Lair.